Very good. I'd like to call to order today's special board meeting of the Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Board of Directors. Let's start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. You okay?
You are able.
I don't think anything's going to keep him down for the pledge. Okay, place your hand over your heart. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No, I don't want to do it on you. Make sure you're all right. Thank you. Okay, so I'll start the meeting with some announcements. Bear with me. This meeting is being conducted in person at the Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency's Rio Vista Water Treatment Plant Boardroom. Beautiful boardroom. As a convenience to the public, members of the public may also participate virtually by logging on to the agency's Zoom meeting. Any member of the public may listen into the meeting or make comments to the board using the call-in number or the Zoom webinar link. In the event that there is a disruption of service which prevents the agency from broadcasting the meetings to members of the public using either the call-in option or the internet-based service, the meeting will not be postponed or rescheduled. It will continue without remote participation. The remote participation option is being provided as a convenience to the public and is not required. Members of the public are welcome to attend the meeting in person. Please come down and join us. To participate in public comment from your computer, tablet, or smartphone, when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on, click the raise hand feature in Zoom. You'll be notified when it's your turn to speak. Please unmute when requested. To participate in public comment via phone, when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on, dial *9 to raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, dial *6 to unmute. If we have members of the public here today, there are public comment cards just outside, or our board secretary Uni will be able to help you. Please fill one of those out, give it to Uni, and she'll make sure that we take care of you. The procedures for today, or the procedures for today's are as follows. Excuse me. I will introduce each agenda item. Staff will present. I will ask for public comments. I'll then ask for discussion and questions from board members. Once concluded, I'll ask for a motion and a second. After any further discussion, the board secretary will call for roll call votes. Uni, do we have all board members present?
We do.
Okay. Do we have any alternates today?
Yes, we do. We have two alternates, Lorraine West and Jeff Boards.
Thank you both. Okay, I think that takes us to item 1.3, public comments. Members of the public may comment as to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of this agency, but that are not on the agenda at this time. We ask that members of the public wishing to comment on items that are included on today's agenda to do so at the time each item is considered. So, are there any public comments now on items that are not covered in the agenda?
We have none online.
Okay, very good. I think that will take us to item 1.4. So item 1.4 is approval of our last meeting's agenda. Are there any changes, additions, or modifications to the agenda? I suppose that's this time's agenda for clarification. Okay, seeing none, I think I can just make the decision that the agenda is approved. That takes us to item 2, approval of the consent calendar. Is there public comment on the consent calendar?
There's none.
Okay, any board discussion? Okay, seeing none. I will need a motion then to approve the consent calendar.
Director Natoli, so moved.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, any discussion?
I'm sorry, who was the second?
It's Director Rozovsky.
Thank you.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, Uni, I think we need a roll call vote for this.
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Ford,
Abstain.
Director Gutzeit,
Yes.
Director Natoli,
Aye.
Director Olzahowski,
Yes.
Director West,
Aye.
Vice President Martin,
Yes.
President Biden.
Yes.
Thank you. The consent calendar has passed.
Very good. That takes us to item 1.3, the meat of today's special meeting. This is consideration of new or replacement well review process required by Governor's Executive Order N-3-23. And Mr. Reduce, I think you'll be leading the staff report.
Yes, thank you, President Biden. We have a follow-up item today for your board. And we just have a few slides and we will walk through them. Okay. Next slide, please, Uni. So as your board is aware, this is a follow-up item. This has been substantially updated since our June 5th meeting. We had a great discussion at the June 5th board meeting on this. The board letter describes how the documents were updated, and there's also an attachment in the board letter that has a more detailed listing of the comments and the responses. And we can go into those in detail if your board would like, but I think my preference would just be to move through this, and then when we get towards the end, if you've got specific questions, we can address them. And we'll just do a quick review of the process. Next slide, please. So the process as we have proposed is pretty simple. The SCV GSA team will communicate with the landowner or potentially a well owner. We will be in touch with them either through a referral from LA County or perhaps they'll get in touch with us directly. But regardless, we will have them fill out the newer replacement groundwater production well form. Staff will review it and make a determination about whether or not that well is exempt from further review or perhaps, or instead that a hydrogeologic report would be required. At our last meeting, there was some discussion about whether or not an appeal process for the staff's decision should be considered. And we think that's fine. And so we've made some changes that would allow an applicant who doesn't feel the hydrogeologic report is required to have that issue brought in front of your board at a regularly scheduled meeting. But moving on, so if the hydrogeologic report is required, it would be submitted. We would advise the landowner or possible well owner, here's the hydrogeologic report, it's listed here in attachment 2. We could walk them through it. We would explain to them that once the report is submitted to us, they'll be asked to put money on deposit with SCV Water. So it and its consultants can spend time reviewing the report. The brackets for funding are also in the document. The consultant fees to review the hydrogeologic report are staggered. For a well that has, I think it's set up as, it's probably 2 to 50 acre feet, would have a initial deposit required of $10,000. Our approach would not be to spend all that money if we didn't need to, but to keep those fees as low as possible. But the cost to do these analyses with the groundwater flow model can get expensive depending on the level of detail. So after the hydrogeologic report is submitted and the GSA staff and consultants review that work, we would look to see whether or not it was consistent with the groundwater sustainability plan. And we would make that recommendation to your board to either find it consistent with the GSP or not consistent. Your board would make the final finding at a regular scheduled board meeting. Certainly the landowner or well owner would be welcome to come and make a brief presentation to your board as well. Next slide, please. Couple slides on the updates. We clarified the county's role or both counties' role in performing the 4B analysis. So this is 4B of the executive order, well interference and subsidence. We've added a well owner option in the event the person seeking the new well is just going to be owning the well and not the land. We've included additional details regarding well design, including the GPM rating of the well, the expected well design capacity, those kinds of things. We've made it more clear that if things are complex and additional review time is needed, that time would be taken, and that if we need to get more information from the landowner or well owner, we would seek it and then continue the review after that. Unused funds for the money put on deposit with SCV water would be returned. In the event additional funds were needed, those would be requested. We've included the appeal process, which, as you've seen, is very simple. It's not complex at this point. Next slide, please. Attachment 1 includes an acknowledgement form where there were a number of new rows added. So this is the acknowledgement form where the landowner or well owner goes through and says, yes, I acknowledge this, or I agree to that. We've added additional details to that acknowledgement form regarding compliance with GSA conditions. So these could be reporting extractions, providing water quality data. So we've added text that says that the GSA retains its statutory authority to seek compliance if those conditions aren't being met. Clarification that extraction will not exceed the proposed values unless otherwise approved by the GSA. Well inspection to verify the well's consistent with what was proposed. Legal destruction of wells, additional monitoring could be required. We've clarified dates for the semi-annual reporting and made the annual reporting for water quality more clear. And what I mean by that is the semi-annual reporting and the water quality reporting would only apply to those non-de minimis wells, the wells that extract more than 2 acre-feet per year. Next slide, please, Uni. Subsidence and well interference. I mentioned this earlier. This is part 4B of the governor's executive order. This is work that we believe the county needs to do to find to do its part with reviewing these well permits. So this has to do with making a determination that the well isn't likely to interfere with nearby wells. So this is well interference or cause subsidence. Ventura County already has a process to do this. They will either do it on their own or they will work with the GSA to perform that analysis. We're in contact with LA County. President Bryden and I were just talking ahead of the meeting today to keep advancing that, so thank you. The hydrogeologic report requirements in attachment 2 will support the county determination. It might not be everything the county requires, but it'll be a heck of a good start. Next slide, please. So we've worked to incorporate your board's feedback from June. We'll continue to work with Los Angeles County and Ventura County on 4B. This is a new process. We don't know how many of these we're going to see a year, but we will improve the process as we get more of these under our belt, and we'll communicate that with your board. Next slide, please. And just wrapping it up, our recommendation is that your board adopt the approach in the board memo and the attachments to review these potential wells so the GSA can be prepared to adhere to the governor's executive order. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, let's start with public comment.
There is none at this time.
Okay, doesn't look like anyone here in person either. So moving beyond public comment, board directors discussion. Director Martin?
Peter.
Oh, did I miss you? Yeah, please.
Just a quick question. Mr. Bunn, you had a chance to review this proposal and the form to check it for any liabilities or any issues from the well owner or landowner and potential of protest to these recommendations?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and you find them,
I
you find no issues?
Yeah, they're acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, President Bryan.
Director Martin?
Thank you, President Bryden.
Moving along.
Rick, thank you for your report, your diligent efforts on staff to respond to the comments and provide a complete summary of all that's been done between the last June meeting and now. I have a question about the hydrogeologic analysis that might or might not be done. Obviously, some people are well owners that may consider the owner's requirement, but it doesn't look like we have any options here in compliance with the executive order. But my question too is, in review of a report that would be submitted, would we also run a parallel analysis with our model that we now have for the basin?
We would take the information from the hydrogeologic report, including the well location, its depth, the anticipated groundwater extraction, any information from nearby wells. And of course, it's more complicated than this, but we would plug that into the flow model, and we would operate that well. We would simulate the operation of that well along with the other nearby wells. After that work was done, the flow model would produce a series of simulated hydrographs, for example, and we would compare the water levels with and without that well to the groundwater sustainability plan's sustainable management criteria. And we would then make a determination, does it have an effect? Yes or no? And we would move on from there.
On a timeline basis, hours required to run that, what would be a reasonable estimate for the time that staff or our consultant would need to run that analysis?
30 days would be about the minimum for them to do the analysis. If it were more complex, it could take more time, and we may need to then ask for more time.
Okay.
These model runs are the initial model run. There's a lot of hours that can be set up in just setting up the model, telling the model, okay, here's the new well, this is the pumping, and then the modeler can turn the model on and walk away for a day, and then come back and look at the results.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
President Bryden, if I could just amplify my answer to Director Orzofsky a little bit. I did review the documents. I don't feel that the documents in and of themselves expose the GSA to any liability, but that doesn't mean that there's no risk. If there's a lot of money riding on this thing and somebody disagrees with the GSA's decision,
Sure.
then they will likely challenge that in court. And I think the best defense of that is not in the documents, it's in the process.
Mhm.
And I have every confidence in our consultant and our board in making the correct decision there, but I didn't mean to suggest that this was a risk-free process.
And staff, confidence in staff. Thanks for that clarification. Additional director discussion. Director Ford.
Thank you, President Biden. A question with regard to the hydrogeologic report. Are they going to be looking at potential subsidence in the report? And if they do, is there a criteria for pass fail?
The report does require them to look at potential subsidence. Good question about pass fail. So let me, if I may, just think out loud about that a little bit. So the groundwater sustainability plan has some general criteria in it about subsidence and what would constitute an undesirable result. So we would be looking at that in light of what the GSP says. But it would be a somewhat, it would be a blend of a qualitative and somewhat quantitative analysis. There aren't specific numerical requirements, for example, this many inches of subsidence over this time frame, over this radius.
All right. And then another question for council, kind of a general question. Permit Streamlining Act, does it apply to this process?
Director Ford, first, let me thank you for having clued us into this question ahead of time, so I could take a little look, but and I'm not an expert on the Permit Streaming Act, but first of all, that those requirements would fall on the county rather who actually issues the permit within the time period or not. I think it is questionable whether that a well permit would be considered a development project. That's the first thing. That's what the Permit Streamlining Act applies to. But the second thing is that the time limit for those start at the conclusion of the environmental work. And if I were the county, I would probably do the environmental work after getting the report from the GSA so that you could tell if there were any adverse environmental effects. And then that clock wouldn't start until you made that determination.
Okay. All right, good. I'm glad that you looked into it, Tom. Thank you.
Sure.
More questions, President Biden?
Thank you, Mr. President. I also sit on the board of directors for the Santa Monica Basin GSA, and something's come up there. I want to make sure we address in these procedures, these forms that we're handing out to folks. And what I'm concerned about is perhaps the impression that an applicant may have that there's going to be a consistency finding, and for them, consistency equals yes, it's consistent. So I would be more comfortable. Specifically, I'm looking at this is page 17 and 18 of, actually, I guess that's page 19 and 20 of the PDF. This is under review procedures. Items 4 and 6. Where the wording is, on item 4, the wording is that for the SCV GSA Board of Directors that contains a recommendation on consistency. And then under number 6, where it says after the Board of Directors considers the staff recommended consistency. And while I know what that means, I want to make sure everybody knows what that means, and perhaps we could change the wording instead of just talking about consistency, saying whether or not it is consistent. I just want us to be clear in these procedures, whoever reads this, that the decision is not for consistency. The decision is whether or not it is consistent. I know at the end, there's also the 2 paragraphs that say the board determines whether it's inconsistent or not inconsistent. Can get a little confusing, but I would just like for us to change the wording in 4 and 6 to whether or not it is consistent. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Okay, any additional discussion? All right, if not, I think that takes us to approval or not. Is there a motion?
I'll move with the recommended change from Director Natoli.
A second?
I will second.
Thank you, Director Ford. Any additional discussion? Okay, Uni, roll call vote, please.
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Ford,
Yes.
Director Goodside,
Yes.
Director Natoli,
Aye.
Director Olzahowski,
Yes.
Director West,
Aye.
Vice President Martin,
Yes.
President Bryden.
Yes.
Thank you. This item 3.1 has passed with the recommendation changes made by Director Natoli.
Thank you all. Thank you, staff. Okay, I think that takes us to item 4, the Executive Director's Report, and I think Mr. Cole.
Thank you, President Bryden. Yeah, just have a couple items. I'll start off by thanking the board for passing that last item, and also thanking Mr. Vergoots. I know he worked really hard on trying to capture the comments and making the edits that were received from the board at the last round. And I think that was a great job of succeeding and kind of capturing those. So thank you guys for the input and the adoption of that policy. Two other things, and this you'll notice this item's a little bit new. It hasn't shown up this way on the agenda before. But what I wanted to do is just have an opportunity that if there was a couple topics that wanted to keep the board up to speed on, that we could do that in this section. And so that's what it's on the agenda for. And I have two such items that I'd like to share with the board today. One is just on our ongoing engagement for Bouquet Canyon. We did have another stakeholder meeting this morning. I think you'll recall the last step was filing a application for a Wildlife Conservation Board grant. The county public works staff had completed that and had filed that. And it is on the Wildlife Conservation Board's agenda for August 24th. It is recommended for approval. There's still some question about how much. There is a number on the agenda that is drafted, but there will be some cost sharing, is my understanding, that's going to need to take place to activate those grant funds. So it's a really good news. It's been a very long process to get to this point. And I know longer than anybody wants it to be, but this is, I think, a critical step in seeing that project to the next phase. So I wanted to share that with you all. The second item that I wanted to share, and I know we started, had some comments at the last board meeting, is in regards to the CMEX mine and the application for appropriation of water there. There's been some action on that in a couple different venues. Our local assemblywoman, Pilar Chavo, has a bill that is active currently that is really geared towards applications that are before the state board that have not been basically acted upon for over 30 years. And it also applies to just mining applications. I know SCV Water was able to move to a support position for that bill, and we'll see if it makes it through its final steps in the process. At the same kind of point in time, the state board actually put out a letter to the CMEX folks that informed them that their application is going to need to be reconsidered. And so there is some back and forth going on now between CMEX and the state board. There were, in the initial water rights applications filing, there were a few parties that had standing in that. One of those was Newhall County Water District. Another was Valencia Water Company. And another was Newhall Land and Farming. We've written a letter. Some of the information contained in the CMEX letter was not correct. And so we've written a letter as SCV Water to correct that language. And the main effort right now is just continuing to monitor the situation. We're reviewing the kind of the legal aspect of weighing in as a GSA in that proceeding. And so you'll hear more from us at a future meeting about that. And Mr. Bunn, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify one thing if I could. The application has not yet been considered by the state board, so it's not going to be reconsidered. What is going to happen is it's going to be re-noticed so that additional people will have, there's a time limit for filing protests, and that since this has been pending for 30 years, that's long since passed. This will reopen that and allow entities that didn't file protests the first time to file it now, and that could be environmental organizations, but it's also folks like the city of Santa Clarita and this GSA. So if we have something to say about it, we'll have the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Bunn, for the clarification. That made it, you made a consistency determination for me. So appreciate that.
No, but it is consistent.
Appreciate that. And that concludes my report. There'll be more to come on that as we continue our research. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right, I believe that takes us to item 5. This is director's requests for future. Sure, before we go there, Director Martin.
Thank you, President Bryden. Mr. Cole, can you summarize the difference between Assemblymember Chavo's bill and what the state board has already done in terms of newly considering the application?
And I may punt that over to Mr. Bunn because it is a legal kind of process that they go through of the application process. I don't know, Mr. Bunn, if you have anything specific.
They have the same desired result. The action now taken by the head of the state board to renotice. She has the power to do that under certain circumstances, change of circumstances kind of thing. And not surprisingly, CMEX is contending that there was no change of circumstances. It's the same project it always was, and nobody's changed downstream. So that is not a certainty. And the Assemblymember Chavo's bill too may not be a certainty. This is the 6th time, I believe, that this has come up in a bill in the legislature, and it has failed the first 5. Now that may well, the climate may be changed now, but it's 2 people going after the same result.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bond. Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Okay, I sped through there. This would be the equivalent of staff reports. So do we have public comments?
We do not.
Okay, very good. And any additional discussion from board directors? Seeing none. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Please, Director West.
Hi, I want to thank the board for your diligent work on going through this very complicated, murky water, pardon the pun. But it is extremely important to this valley that everything that affects water be looked at. Because if there's one thing I learned a long time ago, without water, nothing else works. There is no life. There is no anything. So this is probably one of the most critical things that you will do as an agency and a board, and you won't make everybody happy. It's not possible to make everybody happy. But what we can do is keep our environment healthy, sustainable, and have a future. So I look at this and I appreciate everybody's comments on this because it is really complicated stuff. And I believe that things have changed. I have seen so many changes in the last 50 years. I can't even tell you that the fact is that we're in a completely different valley than we were. So I'd like to see us sustain with what we do have. And I want to thank you all for working so diligently to try to make that happen. It's very appreciated. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Thank you for the big hand, Director Natoli.
You're welcome. And Director West's comments lead into what I was planning to say today. As I said, I sit on another GSA, and I want to acknowledge and appreciate the staff we have at this GSA for their extremely high level of professionalism and competence, and how well run the meetings are, and how smoothly things go. It is a pleasure to sit on this board, and a big part of that, aside from my fellow directors, is the GSA staff. I appreciate you very much. So thank you for all your hard work.
Other discussion? Yeah, I second that. Thank you, Steph. Okay, so I've stepped in it twice. I want to make sure we are ready to move on. See no additional discussion. I think that takes us to item 5. Item 5 is director's request for future agenda items. Okay, seeing none. I think that takes us to the end of the meeting. This is item 6, adjournment. Thank you all for attending. Meeting is concluded.